The metal trash cans clattered as the wounded man slumped against the cold concrete wall, his white shirt soaked in a deep, spreading red. Lily froze, her small hands clutching a plastic water bottle. Beside the man, a younger girl, his daughter, peeked out from behind his shoulder, her eyes wide with a fear that Lily had only seen in stray animals. Lily didn't see the dark tattoo on the man's neck, a symbol that made every police officer in the city turn a blind eye. She only saw a father who was dying. But as she knelt to offer the water, a black sedan screeched to a halt at the alley's mouth. 4 men stepped out, their silenced pistols raised. The man Lily was helping didn't flinch, he just looked at her and whispered, "Close your eyes, little one." The men in the sedan didn't know they had just cornered a lion. They weren't there to talk, they were there to collect a bounty that had put half the city into a frenzy. And they had no idea that by threatening the girl who had shown him mercy, they had just turned a localized hit into a total war. Stay with us, because the way this dying man protects his savior will change everything you think you know about power. The industrial district of Busan always smelled of salt and rust. It was a place where children learned to walk fast and keep their heads down. Everything felt gray, hollow, and dangerous. Lily moved slowly through the narrow passages, her pink coat a single spark of color in the gloom. She had spent her life being told that help never comes for people like her. Across the district, in a high-rise made of glass and blood, the order had been given, find him. Leave no witnesses. I had exactly 3 minutes before the organ music stopped and the humiliation began. My fingers trembled as I smoothed the lace of a wedding dress that felt more like a straitjacket than a dream. Around me, the white garden tent hummed with the high-frequency chatter of Seoul's elite, the sound of silk rubbing against silk and the clink of champagne flutes. Outside, a summer rain began to pelt against the canvas roof, but in here, the air was thick, heavy, and suffocating. I approached the altar like I was walking toward my own firing squad. Choi Sung-won stood at the altar with a smile that did not reach his eyes. He was a corporate climber in a tuxedo bought with my own sweat and overtime pay. For 4 years, I had worked double shifts at the diner to pay for his rise to the top. I thought he loved me, but I was wrong. 10 minutes ago, I had heard him laughing in the dressing room. He told his friends I was just a stepping stone and mocked my appearance as a simple waitress. He said he would say the vows, but he wouldn't mean a single one. When the priest asked if he took me as his wife, Sung-won did not say I do. Instead, he let out a cruel laugh that echoed through the tent. He looked at the rich guests and pointed a finger at my tears. Look at her, he mocked, his voice sharp and mean. Did you really think a man in my position would marry a waitress? The guests gasped, and my world shattered into 1,000 pieces. I felt small, invisible, and utterly alone. But then, the air in the room turned cold. A man in the back row stood up, his presence cutting through the flowery decorations like a blade. It was Moon Taesung. He looked like he had been forged from iron, with a sharp jawline and a dark navy suit that cost more than my entire life. He had been watching my quiet work at his private club for months. He moved toward the altar with a slow, dangerous rhythm. Taesung ignored the shocked whispers of the elite crowd. He stepped onto the altar and looked directly at Sung-won with eyes that were as dark as obsidian. Without saying a word to the groom, he reached out and took my shaking hand in his. His grip was warm and steady, a sharp contrast to the cold betrayal I had just felt. The lady deserves a real man, Taesung said, his voice deep and commanding. He looked at the priest, then back at me with a steady gaze. If the groom refuses, then I will. A heavy silence fell over the tent as the most feared man in the city claimed a broken waitress in front of everyone who had just laughed at her. My heart drummed a new, terrifying rhythm against my ribs. I didn't know where he was taking me, but for the first time in years, I wasn't invisible anymore. The world outside the wedding tent was a blur of gray rain and flashing lights. Moon Taesung did not wait for the shocked guests to find their voices. He kept his warm, steady hand locked around mine as he led me toward a line of waiting black cars. His men moved like shadows, clearing a path through the mud and the whispers. I felt the heavy lace of my wedding dress dragging on the wet ground, but I was too numb to care. Behind us, I could still hear Sungwon shouting, his voice full of a pride that had finally been wounded. Before I could even think, I was tucked into the back of a silent, expensive car that smelled of new leather and wood. Taesung sat beside me, his long legs taking up the space and his presence filling the air. He did not look at me. He simply stared out the window as the engine hummed to life. We moved through the streets of Seoul, leaving the ruined ceremony far behind. I gripped the seat with shaking fingers, the silver ring on my hand feeling like a heavy shackle. I had spent years serving others, and now I felt like I was being delivered to a new, much more dangerous master. We arrived at a towering building made of dark glass and polished steel. Armed guards stood at the entrance, bowing low as Taesung walked past them. The elevator ride was silent and fast, shooting us up to the very top floor. When the doors opened, I gasped. The penthouse was a world of gold and marble, with windows that stretched from the floor to the ceiling, showing the entire city glowing below. It was beautiful, but to me, it felt like a gilded cage. "This is your home now," Taesung said. His voice was deep and calm, but it carried the weight of a command. I looked at the heavy steel door that clicked shut behind us. There were cameras in the corners of the ceiling and guards stationed in the hallway. I realized then that I wasn't just a guest, I was a prize. I had traded a man who mocked me for a man who owned the city, and I didn't know which one was scarier. "Why did you do it?" I whispered, my voice finally coming back to me. I looked down at my stained dress and my red, tired hands. "You don't even know me. To you, I am just a waitress." Taesung turned to face me. He took a slow step forward, his dark eyes searching my face. He didn't look at my dress or my size, he looked at me like he was seeing something no one else ever bothered to notice. "I have watched you work for months, Mireille," he said softly. "I saw how you stood tall while others tried to make you feel small. I don't need a doll. I need someone who knows how to survive." I backed away, my heart drumming against my ribs. I had spent my life in the shadows, and now I was standing in the brightest light possible. Taesung was a man of power, and I was just a girl who knew how to carry a tray. I looked at the vast, empty penthouse and felt a new kind of terror. I was safe from Sungwon, but I was now part of a world where one wrong move could cost me everything. The silence of the penthouse was heavy, filled only by the distant hum of the city far below. I stood near the marble kitchen island, still wearing the torn lace that felt like a lie. Taesung moved to a small cabinet and poured a glass of water, his movements as smooth as a predator in the dark. He didn't look like a man who had just stolen a bride, he looked like a man who had finally collected a debt. "You think I chose you because of a whim, Mireille?" he asked, handing me the glass. His eyes were dark and steady. "I don't make mistakes, and I don't do things without a reason." I took the water, my hands still shaking so much that the ice clinked against the glass. "I don't understand," I whispered. "I was just a waitress at the Moon Club. I stayed in the kitchen. I cleaned the spills. I was nobody." Taesung leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. A small, knowing smile touched his lips, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who saw everything. "That is exactly why I was watching you," he said. "In my world, everyone tries to be loud. They wear gold to show power. They shout to show strength. But you? You were invisible." He stepped closer, and I felt the air grow warm. "For months, I watched you work those double shifts. I saw the way the rich customers looked through you as if you were part of the furniture. I saw them knock trays out of your hands and mock your tired eyes. Most people would have broken. They would have cried or quit." He reached out, his thumb gently brushing over the rough calluses on my palm, the marks of a life spent carrying heavy burdens for others. "But you just picked up the broken glass and kept going. You have a strength that most of my men will never understand. You know how to survive in a world that wants to crush you." I looked down at my hands. I had always been ashamed of them. I thought they were just the hands of a servant. But the way Taesung spoke made them feel like weapons. He didn't see a girl who was lesser than, he saw a survivor who had been forged in the fire of the service industry. The man you were going to marry is a coward, Taesung said, his voice dropping to a low growl. He wanted you to stay small so he could feel big. I don't want a shadow, Mireille. I want that invisible fire I saw in the club. I am going to give you a throne, and in return, I want you to show this city that the girl they ignored is the most dangerous person in the room. I stared at him, my heart drumming a fast, terrifying rhythm. For the first time, I realized that Taesung didn't just want to save me. He wanted to change me. He saw a queen hidden under the apron, and he was ready to burn the world down just to let her out. The morning sun hit the glass walls of the penthouse, making the marble floors glow like ice. I stood in the center of the giant living room, still feeling like a stranger in my own skin. Taesung had been gone since dawn, leaving me with nothing but the city view and my own thoughts. The silence was broken by the sharp sound of the elevator chime. The doors opened, and a team of people stepped out, moving with a fast, professional energy. There were women carrying long garment bags and men holding leather cases full of mysterious tools. "It is time to begin," a woman said, her voice crisp and no-nonsense. She looked at my messy hair and the way I held my shoulders hunched over. She didn't look at me with pity, but like I was a difficult project that needed her full attention. For the next 5 hours, I was no longer a person. I was a canvas. They scrubbed the kitchen grease from my skin until it felt raw. They brushed my hair until my scalp ached, and they applied colors to my face that made my eyes look sharp and dangerous. I struggled as they pulled me into a dress made of black velvet that felt as heavy as armor. Every time I tried to slouch or hide my hands, a tutor would tap my shoulder with a silver rod, forcing me to stand tall. Getty Images. "You are not a doll to be dressed up," the lead tutor told me, her eyes meeting mine in the mirror. "A doll is soft. A doll is quiet. Master Taesung wants a leader. You must learn to carry your weight like it is your power, not your shame." I looked at my reflection and gasped. The girl who had spent years hiding in the back of the diner was gone. In her place was a woman who looked like she could command an army. The dress didn't hide my size, it made me look solid and unbreakable, like a mountain made of stone. My hands, once rough from carrying trays, now looked elegant under the soft lights. When Taesung finally returned that evening, he stopped at the edge of the room. He didn't smile, but his eyes darkened as he took in the change. He walked toward me, his shoes clicking slowly on the marble. He didn't offer a compliment about my beauty. Instead, he reached out and touched the high collar of my dress. "Do you feel it?" he asked softly. "The weight of the world is no longer on your back, Mireille. It is under your feet." I looked into his eyes and realized that he wasn't trying to make me pretty for his friends. He was building a shield around me. He was giving me the tools to fight back against everyone who had ever called me just a waitress. I realized then that being a leader in his world would be harder than any shift I had ever worked, but for the first time in my life, I wanted to see exactly how much space I could take up. The transformation was not just about the black velvet dress or the sharp way I now held my head. It was about power, and Taesung was ready to show me exactly how it worked. He sat at his desk, the city lights reflecting in his dark eyes, and slid a thick folder across the polished wood toward me. "Sungwon believes he has climbed to the top because he is smart," Taesung said, his voice as cold as the marble floors. "He thinks he can mock you and then go back to his comfortable office as if nothing happened. He is wrong." I opened the folder. Inside were documents for a corporate takeover of the very company where Sungwon worked as a rising executive. I saw the numbers and the legal stamps, but one page made my breath catch. Taesung had used his vast wealth to buy out the investors, and he had placed my name on the title as the majority shareholder. I wasn't just a guest in a penthouse anymore, I was the owner of the world Sungwon had sacrificed my happiness to join. Tomorrow morning, there is a board meeting, Taesung continued, standing up and walking toward the window. Sung-won will be there to present his new project. He expects to be promoted. Instead, he will find out that the woman he called just a waitress is now his boss. I felt a spark of that invisible fire Taesung had talked about. For years, I had worked double shifts so Sung-won could wear expensive ties and look important. I had stayed in the kitchen while he went to fancy parties. Now, the roles were flipped. The next morning, I entered the company headquarters. The lobby was full of glass and steel, and the workers moved with a nervous energy. I didn't hide in the shadows. I walked through the front doors, my black velvet dress rustling, and every person I passed bowed their head. I could see the confusion in their eyes, but they didn't dare speak. When I reached the top-floor conference room, I saw him. Sung-won was standing at the head of a long glass table, laughing with his colleagues and checking his reflection in a window. He looked confident and proud, exactly like he did before he broke my heart at the altar. The room went silent as the doors swung open. Sung-won turned around, his smile ready for a new investor, but it froze the moment he saw my face. His eyes widened, and he actually stumbled back against the table, his face turning the color of ash. "Mireille," he stammered, his voice high and weak. "What are you doing here? You can't be here. This is a private meeting." I didn't answer right away. I walked to the head of the table, pulled out the heavy leather chair, and sat down. I looked at him, not with anger, but with the calm, steady gaze Taesung had taught me. "Actually, Sung-won, I own this table," I said, my voice steady and clear. "And since I am now the majority shareholder, you will be reporting your progress directly to me. Sit down. You have a lot of work to do." The look of pure terror on his face was the first payment on a very long debt. I realized then that Taesung was right, the weight was no longer on my back. It was firmly under my feet. The high society gala was held in a ballroom that felt like it was made of diamonds and starlight. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, throwing sharp bits of light onto the expensive silk dresses and sharp suits of Seoul's most powerful families. I stood at the entrance, my heart hammering against my ribs, but my back remained as straight as a steel rod. I was no longer wearing the stained apron of a waitress, I was draped in a gown of midnight blue that shimmered with every step I took. Taesung stood beside me, a dark shadow of silent power. He didn't need to shout to get attention, the crowd simply parted for him like water around a stone. He didn't look at the other guests. His focus was entirely on me, his hand resting lightly on the small of my back to remind me that I wasn't alone. "Remember what you learned, Mireille," he whispered, his voice low and steady. "They are only loud because they are afraid. You have nothing to fear from people who have never worked a day in their lives." We walked into the center of the room, and I saw them. Sung-won was standing near the champagne fountain, leaning close to a woman in a bright pink dress who looked like she had never known a moment of hardship. This was his new socialite girlfriend, the woman he thought was a step up from a waitress. When he saw me approaching, his face twisted into a cruel smirk. He clearly thought the corporate takeover was just a business trick and that, in this room of elites, I would still be the same girl he could bully. "Look who decided to play dress-up," Sung-won mocked, loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. He looked at his girlfriend and laughed. "You can put a diamond on a pebble, but it's still just a rock. Does the help even know which fork to use, or are you looking for a tray to carry?" The woman in pink giggled, looking me up and down with fake pity. A few weeks ago, those words would have made me cry and hide in the kitchen. But today, I felt nothing but a cold, lethal grace. I looked at Sung-won, not with anger, but with the calm boredom I used to show to rude customers at the diner. "Actually, Sung-won," I said, my voice cutting through the music with perfect clarity. "I was just wondering if you had finished the report I asked for this morning. You seemed quite busy checking your reflection in the lobby." Sung-won's face turned a deep, angry red. He opened his mouth to shout, but he stopped when his eyes met Taesung's. Taesung didn't say a word, but the look in his eyes promised a very painful end to the night if Seung-hwan continued. The man who had once mocked me suddenly looked like a trapped animal. I took a sip of my drink and looked at the socialite in pink. "I hope you enjoy your evening," I told her with a polite smile. "Just be careful. He has a habit of leaving when things get difficult." I turned and walked away, my midnight silk rustling against the floor. I didn't look back to see their shocked faces. Backed by Taesung's silent strength, I had finally realized that the only people who are truly small are those who try to make others feel that way. The glitter of the gala was quickly replaced by the cold, hard reality of the syndicate. Taesung and I had barely returned to the penthouse when the air in the room shifted from victory to danger. The security monitors, which usually showed the quiet hallways, suddenly flickered with shadows of men moving in the darkness. Rivals within the Mafia had been waiting for a moment of weakness, and they had found it in me. They believed that Taesung's choice to marry a low-status waitress meant he had lost his edge and was no longer fit to lead the bloodline. A sudden explosion rocked the building, shattering the beautiful glass windows that overlooked the city. Before I could even scream, Taesung lunged toward me, pushing me behind a heavy marble pillar just as a spray of bullets tore through the room. I felt the heat of the air as he stood his ground, returning fire with the clinical precision I had seen him use so many times before. But then, I saw him jerk back. A dark stain began to spread across the shoulder of his charcoal suit, and he slumped against the pillar, his face turning a terrifying shade of gray. "Taesung!" I cried out, my hands reaching for him. I saw his dark eyes struggle to stay focused, the Iron Boss finally showing a crack in his armor. "Stay down, Mireille," he wheezed, his grip on his gun weakening. "They're coming for the throne." Outside the door, I heard the shouting of men and the heavy thud of boots. The guards Taesung trusted were being overwhelmed by the conspirators who wanted to end his reign. For a second, I felt like that invisible waitress again, the one who wanted to hide in the kitchen and wait for the nightmare to end. But then I looked at Taesung's bleeding wound and remembered the Iron Queen he had built me to be. I realized that if I did nothing, the man who saw my worth when no one else did would die. I reached into the hidden compartment of the marble table where Taesung kept his backup weapons. My fingers, once rough from carrying diner trays, now felt steady and sure as I gripped the cold metal of a handgun. I stood up, no longer slouching or hiding my face. The weight of the world was firmly under my feet, and I was ready to use it. "Close your eyes and breathe," I told Taesung, mirroring the calm, steady tone he had used with me. I stepped out from behind the pillar, facing the door as the first wave of attackers burst through. They expected to find a dying boss and a crying girl, but instead, they found a woman who knew exactly how to survive in a world that wanted to crush her. I raised the weapon, my posture perfect and my gaze like obsidian, and for the first time in my life, I took complete charge of the room. The high-ceilinged penthouse was a battlefield of shattered glass and red emergency lights. Taesung lay against the marble pillar, his breathing heavy and uneven. The dark stain on his suit was a constant reminder that the time for hiding was over. Outside the heavy doors, the shouting grew louder, and I could hear the distinct sound of the service elevator being forced open. In that moment, a strange calm washed over me. It was the same cold focus I used to feel during a Friday night rush at the diner, when 10 orders were backing up and customers were screaming for their checks. Back then, I was the only thing standing between the kitchen and total chaos. Now, the stakes were life and death, but the feeling was exactly the same. I reached for the tactical radio on Taesung's belt. My voice didn't shake as I keyed the channel. "This is Mireille," I said, my tone as crisp and clear as if I were calling out an order for pancakes. "The boss is down, but he is alive. I am taking command of the defense." There was a split second of silence on the other end. The guards were used to born Mafia princesses who screamed at the sight of blood. They weren't used to a woman who had survived the service industry. "Team Alpha, move to the north service entrance," I commanded, watching the security monitors that flickered through the smoke. "They are trying to funnel you into the lobby. Don't take the bait." "Team Beta, seal the ventilation shafts and move to the back exit. I wasn't just guessing. I had spent months as a waitress observing how people moved through rooms and where they looked when they thought no one was watching. I knew the blind spots of this building better than the men who had built it. As the first group of attackers burst through the main doors, I didn't panic. I used the heavy marble island as a shield, just like I used to use the kitchen counter to block out a crowded dining room. I coordinated the guards over the radio, moving them like pieces on a chessboard. I directed them to use the shadows and the narrow hallways to trap the intruders. Now, I whispered into the radio. On my signal, the lights in the hallway went out, and the specialized security teams moved in. Within minutes, the sounds of fighting began to fade, replaced by the quiet clicking of handcuffs. I didn't stop until the lead guard confirmed the floor was clear. I stood in the middle of the ruined living room, the handgun still steady in my grip, looking every bit the Iron Queen Taesung had promised I would become. I had proven that a waitress's calm was more dangerous than a princess's pride. I turned back to Taesung, who was watching me with a look of pure shock and pride in his dark eyes. The Iron Boss was wounded, but his syndicate was safe, and for the first time, everyone in this building knew exactly who I was. The sun began to rise over Seoul, painting the shattered glass of the penthouse in soft shades of pink and gold. The smoke from the night's battle had finally cleared, leaving a heavy silence that felt peaceful for the first time in years. Taesung sat on a velvet chair, his shoulder bandaged and his face pale, but his eyes were full of a light I had never seen before. He looked at the ruins of his home and then at me, standing tall with the handgun finally tucked away. "The city will talk about last night for a long time," Taesung said, his voice a bit weak but full of pride. "They saw a waitress become a queen. But I don't care about their talk. I want to finish what we started, Mireille. Not for the cameras, and not for the elite families. For us." I looked at my hands. They were no longer the hands of an invisible servant or a crying victim. They were the hands that had saved an empire. I walked over to him, my midnight blue gown rustling against the marble. We didn't need a grand tent or hundreds of fake guests. We didn't need Sungwon's mockery or the socialites' giggles. We stood together on the balcony, the morning wind blowing through my hair. Taesung took a small velvet box from his pocket and pulled out a simple, heavy gold band. It was the final vow of the Iron Dragon, a ring that stood for a loyalty that could never be broken. "I, Moon Taesung, take you, Wang Mireille, as my wife," he said, his voice deep and steady. "I offer you my life, my sword, and my throne. I see you, and I will always stand beside you." I took his hand, my own grip firm and sure. "I, Wang Mireille, take you as my husband," I replied, my voice echoing over the city. "I am no longer the girl who hides in the kitchen. I am the fire that protects this house. I see your scars, and I choose to walk beside you." As we exchanged the rings, I realized that my old life was truly gone. The sore feet from double shifts and the shame of being too much had been replaced by a power I had earned myself. Sungwon was out there somewhere, likely struggling in the poverty he once feared, while I stood at the very top of the world. Taesung leaned in and kissed me, a promise that the weight of the world would always be firmly under our feet. I was no longer a waitress or a victim. I was the heart of the Iron Dragon Empire, and the city below was finally ours to command.